Friends, let me introduce you to Kiona Medina. Kiona is a Colombian-born visual artist whose art involves not only visual expression, but also inner transformation, healing, and restoration. Thus, for Kiona, art and ministry are inseparable. Visual expression goes hand in hand with incarnation, that is, the presence of God in what we see and in what we touch. I spent time with Kiona, wanting to know more about this relationship between her art and her Catholic faith. I really love your art, and I especially love an artist that's in touch with her spirituality and then uses that to the benefit of others. So, Kiona, the first thing I want to ask you is maybe some thoughts on the intersection between your art and Catholic faith. How does that work for you?
Well, thank you so much for having me and connecting with me. I am very grateful for that question as well, because I think we're in a time when it's important to get to know, or at least have curiosity over traditions that have perhaps a different reputation than what I would like it to have. And so this is a great honor for me to speak about the Catholic faith in a positive light. And as an artist, it is an identity that I own as someone that intersects and connects different areas. So when it comes to making art, to producing art, to sharing art, it is not just an expression, a visual or any other modality, but it's also a connection to my mind, to my heart, to my spirit. And the Catholic faith offers a connection to the mind, the heart, the spirit, the body. And part of art making and part of creating involves all of those areas and all of those parts of my identity. So for me, it's a perfect match. It wasn't always that, but now it is. Now that I can see it, that I'm connected to it, that I'm more aware of it, then it aligns perfectly.
I notice you like to use your hands a lot.
Yes.
And that's true right now, and that's true in your YouTube videos. You talk about your art as involving embodiment, and and that as I've observed, that helps you help other people in that you invite other people to sort of embody what's going on internally in art. That whole thing reminds me of something really central to Catholic faith, and that's incarnation. What does God becoming human in Jesus mean for you, and what does that mean for your art and your ministry?
That is like asking what makes me come alive the most, and that is connection. I use that word a lot because of how I see it in nature, I see it in art, I see it in theology, I see it in different spiritual traditions, that everything is interconnected. For me, Jesus, being the part of the Trinitarian God, but being part of this, the human experience in a specific time, in a specific way, is the missing puzzle or the key that to me fits into my experience of being human. I need to relate to a God. I want to relate to a God that knows what it's like to cry, to eat, to walk, to be in pain, to have friendships, to be betrayed, to have the whole spectrum of humanity. And in my search and in my curiosity of other traditions, I did not find that as fulfilling as I did in the person of Jesus. So as an artist, that makes it tangible. I cannot make an art piece or share a play or a writing or any of my expressions without going through what is it that I humanly feel and experience here. art is not just about ideas and thoughts, it's about what happens in this container, in this body.
Yeah.
And so again, that brings up the, like, I want to relate to a God that knows that. And in that alignment, then there is it's not just empathy or even consolation, it's more belonging. I belong to this God that helps me to be human.
You are not only an artist, you're not only a Catholic artist, but you're also an art therapist.
Yes.
And I've noticed that you invite other people into a process of healing through art. First question is, how does that relate to what we've just talked about in terms of embodiment, in terms of art being sort of an embodiment of what's inside of us?
Art therapy came into my life by a part-time job that I had at a shelter for survivors of domestic violence. And I was an interpreter at the time for the therapist and the clients. And the therapist happened to be expressive arts therapist and drama therapist. And they introduced me to the power, to the accessibility, to the tool of art as a means of nonverbal expression. The pain that this woman and the people living at the shelter were holding was and continues to be too much for just words to be used. So they would smear or as much paint, and they would bang on boards, and they would play drums, and they would do plays, and they would do all sorts of alternative forms of expression. And I would be the mouth and ears of this therapist and these people there. And that became the way of me of bridging and connecting the use of art as a tool and make it tangible. You can use a hammer to build a house. You can also use the hammer for, other things. And so it like totally reframed the way that art could be. I could use it as a form of expression, but I could also use it as a form of healing.
How have you seen that happen? How have you seen God enter into this process of healing through art?
For me, the fetal position, getting into your body into a fetal position and crawling into that, whether you're in a physical space or at your home on Zoom with me, getting into this position connects to our primal brain of going back to the womb. And that, for me, as a client and as a mental health provider or facilitator, has become a huge tool when folks physically get their body into that position. Sometimes with a blanket, sometimes with a sheet of, bed sheet, and they crawl into this tight bud, this tight container, tight shape. Like, it feels like they become childlike. And for me, that's the core of our faith, that we are children of God, and that we're not self-efficient, that we cannot do it all, that we cannot heal ourselves, that we need God.
So it's not only about drawing things,
No.
It's about movement and actions as well.
Yes. And that's also one of the things that fire me up a lot about providing these offerings to folks, because when you hear an art therapist, when you hear being an artist in general, you associate that with painting or maybe even poetry, music, writing, but there are many forms of expression, nonverbal expression, that go into this definition of art as a tool for healing, for reconnection. Sometimes I have folks rip paper, just regular sheet of paper. And so there are many ways of ripping the paper. You can rip it slowly, you can rip it fast, you can make shapes while you're ripping it. But there's something about the tangible way that this ripping connects perhaps to the pain that's in here. Yeah. Or sometimes with the changes. Maybe it's a transition, it's a job change, it's grief or something else going on in life. And this ripping, this somatic, tangible connection becomes a way of seeing it, of accessing it, what perhaps we don't see and access in here.
You say, as a therapist and as a client myself, I know that therapy without faith is empty.
Yes.
Without a reference and a relationship to the Creator, co-creation between two people is not substantial. That's like two employees working on a project without checking in with the boss, el patrón. Tell me, what do you do, Kiona, in your personal spirituality to stay in touch with, quote unquote, the boss?
Right now, I work at a church in faith formation with youth, and I do have a human boss. And I also have the huge privilege of having the Blessed Sacrament here in this location, in this parish. So there's a little chapel that has the Blessed Sacrament right there. And so when I come in to work in the morning, I like to tell myself I need to check in with my boss, which is God, in this part of my life as a faith formation person, minister. And that check-in looks like coming into the chapel and, saying hi to God. Is someone to me. So I want to acknowledge that someone is right there. I can't just drive by and come into work. That, God is someone. And so that's one way that I check in, or like acknowledge it as the boss, the one who has better ideas than me, the one that has a bigger vision than me. Yeah. And then when I leave, when I go home, I like to go by the chapel and say, okay, we did our day, and this is how it went, and like have a way of checking out. But that's the way that my daily routine here at the parish works. And then the cool thing about Catholic faith and the Trinitarian God is that we have God the Father / boss, and then there's Jesus the Son, and the Spirit, Holy Spirit. And so my way of relating to Jesus, that feels more like an eye-to-eye relationship. It's not the boss, but it's more of someone that journeys with me. So I do leave here and then go do my other things, and continue to have a dialogue and a relationship, of what my life continues to be outside of this physical space. And then moved by the Spirit is, for me, a way of connecting with creation. I love going on hikes and being in a relationship with nature and seeing like the Spirit move through nature, through creation, but also in people and also in circumstances, and having an understanding of the all-encompassing God that is all around. And so that is super rich in our faith, to have access, to have connection to this God that has so many entry points for our hearts.
When you show someone a piece of your art, do you have that sense of this is something not just of me, but of God?
Art making, in the terms of art therapy or healing, is more like, let's co-create, you and I, something that for both of us can be enriching and expanding and healing. And so in my work with people, I see that as a work of art. We are going into the depths of what the person's inner world is, and we're using art tools, whether it's the body itself as crawling into a womb, or expressing some sort of image, or moving to some sort of sounds, and all of that is relational, because as a facilitator and as a woman of faith, I have to also tap into the trust that the Spirit is also moving that dialogue and that connection. And that's relational. I cannot just create a product out of my own or their own intuition.
So when you say relational, are you talking about relationship with God, relationship with other people?
Yes, all of it.
Both, all of it.
Yes. I like to see it as a triad, as in, the person, the client, the recipient, the co-creator, me, and the process that we're in. And in that process, in that art making, in that sharing, there's faith. There is the acknowledgement that this is bigger than us, and that we are playing in this dialogue, in this connection that can lead us into unexpected and beautiful ways.
We're also talking about something very personal, aren't we, when it comes to art and art therapy, and that's regrounding. What does that mean?
Regrounding is a term that I co-created a few years ago, around the need to go back to the ground, to go back to what is now the center. It's kind of like the visual of going back to the seed, and then from that center, from that seed, then springing out again and returning, like bearing fruit. So it is a process that involves this coming back, returning, staying in this center, and from that growing out again. The now what how I'm adapting it right now is also in the form of service, of giving, of relating to the world, world needs, or community needs. But all of that has to come from that center for me.
In talking about regrounding and centering, you've created a piece of art right behind you. Could you maybe pick it up and tell us a little bit about that and what it means in terms of regrounding?
Yes. So this is a piece that I did on the process of the clay being centered, so that it can reground or return to the earth, or serve, or give to others. In this case, the clay is a pot that is being held by two hands, that in my experience is the holding of God. Is God holding my life? Is God holding my identity? Is God holding my desires? Is God centering me? And from that space, from that cozy held space, then we can receive, we can give, we can have an experience with the space inside. But I wanted to emphasize the hands being intimately close to the clay. Like both hands are cozy, kind of like when we're holding a cup of tea or a cup of chocolate, whatever. And having that coziness of both hands, I think that there's a tenderness in God that can translate to the way that we're held when we allow that centering to happen.
Is this something you would show to a client, someone who's in the process of healing?
I think so, yeah. I think more than showing it, it's something that I would like to do with the client. So if we can have access to clay, then the client can do the actual centering with the clay itself. So have a bit more of an experiential quality than just looking at that centering piece.
So here we have a boat with, looks like some sort of energy or light emanating from it, and there's the I am right in the middle. I know in your YouTube videos and on your website you've talked about I am, even linking it to the Hebrew Bible, where God's name is I am. So obviously this piece has something to do with that?
Yes, absolutely. I absolutely love that God's name is I am, or how it shows in the Bible and in the dialogue with Moses in the burning bush. That did and continues to be part of my own centering, and knowing that no matter what adjective or what noun or what happens after the I am, God is the one that is the center of my identity. And so this came from a series that I was doing on seascapes, and it had to do with self-portraits and experiences that I've lived. And in the desolating or desolation time, or painful times that feels like the boat has broken sails and there's nowhere to go or how to even navigate anymore, God is inside the boat. And that goes to the New Testament passage of Jesus being in the boat when the disciples were also scrambling and frightened. And so here is this visual of God is in this boat that feels completely broken and abandoned. The waves, the clouds, the weather, like the tempest that's happening, can feel overwhelming. And then the light that's inside is what sustains it and ultimately heals it and restores it. I did some writing as well of relating to the ocean, or like naming myself as the ocean, and having I guess a relationship to the circumstances that were crashing the boat. But yeah, ultimately everything connects to the light within.
What would you say to someone who says to you, I'm thinking of becoming an artist, what advice do you have for me?
I invite you to think, to explore creativity as a relationship to the creator, and I invite you to question and to examine and to make art that expresses that relationship. That ultimately leads to the creator, that ultimately leads to your journey with the creator. Creativity is not, for me, is not so much about making something beautiful, or creating something that we can frame and put on a pedestal or a show or a gallery. I think art making nowadays and always has been and can be about the full spectrum of the human experience, and if we connect that to the God that became human, then it not only amplifies our art making, but it helps us to see everything as an art process.
Kiona, what you do is beautiful, and what you do with it in terms of including other people is beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share that with me and with the people that view this video.
Thank you for having me. This was amazing. Thank you.